agreeing to talk to me today on the miseducation of the American. And today's topic is Black fatherhood. So Jordan, tell me about your Black fatherhood project and really what led you to make this documentary.
Yeah, so the Black Fatherhood Project is it's a documentary film, right? It's about an hour and 15 minutes long. I started it while I was in graduate school, just as a side project. My initial inspiration was just to like counter the narrative of the stereotypical deadbeat Black dad, and I just wanted to make like a short film over the course of the summer of 2006. And so I started interviewing dads, and getting some good interviews about what are the things that are important to them as fathers, and teaching their children and what they see as their responsibilities and their roles as fathers and in the community. But as I started doing more and more of those interviews, I started to realize that I was kind of ignoring the elephant in the room, if you will, which is like, well, why does this stereotype exist in the first place, right? So for me, that was like, I need to start looking back at the history, and I really kind of went in reverse, and so started looking at like the crack epidemic, and was like, okay, there's a little bit of answers there with the war on drugs and everything, and its impact on the criminal justice system, mass incarceration, and impacting families in that way. But I got to keep going back, right? So I kind of kept going back into these kind of major periods of history, looking at the civil rights movement, looking at World War II, and looking at sort of Reconstruction, and then slavery. And even with slavery, it took us back to, okay, where that breakup of the Black family started, but I didn't want that to be the end of the story, or the beginning of the story, if you will. And so I had to find some research and have some folks talk about Africa, West Africa, and like what the family structure looked like there, and what the role of fathers was there, so that we would have something to look to as a source of inspiration, and knowing that it wasn't always this way for us. And here's some examples of what it did look like, for some of our ancestors back on the motherland. And so the film is sort of two-part. It's one part talking with fathers and understanding like, the roles and responsibilities, and every family is different, right? So it's different for all the men. And that's part of the beauty of it, is that this fatherhood is just, it doesn't have to look like one particular type of thing. And then the other part of the film is the historical context. And so it breaks down like how we got to this point where, 68% or something like that now is of Black children are born into single parent households.
So can you talk to me a little bit about, I'm really fascinated with, I love it that you didn't stop with enslaved people, that you went beyond that. It reminds me of just how in going to the Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture, how they start at the genesis of Africa. And so what were some of your findings starting with that genesis?
Well, yeah, I mean, man, what I found, so one of the first books I was told to read was Facing Mount Kenya by, I'm blanking on it, Kenyatta. I'm blanking. He was the first Prime Minister of Kenya. I'm blanking on his name right now. But in that book, he talks about like basically his family life in his village, and like what family life was there. Kind of breaks down like the society and all the different aspects of the village society of his tribe. And what I found was that the role of the father was not embraced or expected upon just the biological father of the child. It was a responsibility of all the men in the biological father's cohort, if you will, that went through the rites of passage together.
Hmm.
So, in today's society, it would be the equivalent of like my high school classmates or whatever, right?
Community,
Um,
right? Yeah.
yeah, in my community. And so it could be, that those other men had the same authority over a child and responsibility, right? Authority and responsibility of that child to look after that child as if it were their own. And so you had a father, but you had a lot of fathers, you know what I mean, in the community. And that is something that I think we could still look to as a source of inspiration to help us, get through the systems of oppression that we're dealing with today. Um, we've become increasingly individualistic here in the United States, have lost that greater sense of community and reciprocal responsibility for one another. Um, and I think that's part of our struggle now. You know what I mean?
That's interesting because I think about growing up on the south side of Chicago in a predominantly Black neighborhood, and that's the
Yeah.
community that existed. Like, so if my
Hmm.
dad was at work and my dad worked a swing
Right.
shift, worked overnight, like I knew that the person that lived, Mr. Fernandez, was going to be, if he saw me doing something wrong,
Right.
it was just like my father had
Yeah.
was there. And so, like growing up in that environment creates its own ideations of what people think
Hmm.
fatherhood looks like. But I came from a two-parent household. And honestly, most of the Black people that I knew were products of two-parent household. And if they weren't, they had at least a relationship with their dad. And if they didn't, it was kind of an anomaly. Um, so my lived experiences don't correlate to this myth and distortion. What's your personal experience with Black fatherhood?
Yeah. So, and mine is very similar to yours, right? In that we have I grew up with my father in a two-parent household, um, and similarly, like my father's group of friends, and homies were also like just very much around, and uh, I learned a lot, just as much from them as I did from my dad in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? And they also had the influence on me that was beyond just like some stranger or dad's friend, if that makes sense, right? There was more to it, and that's a lot of what Dr. Wade Nobles in my film talks about, is that we've kept some of these traditions. They're still there. You can look at a Black American life and
Yeah.
see a lot of the roots of African society, West African society ways of life. So we've kept some of that. But part of what made me want to make the film was that I actually felt that in my community and in my family, um, there I was actually rare in that I had a two-parent household, and that my father was around and actively involved in my life. So there were my other peers at my schools and on my basketball teams that a lot of them were from single parent households with their mothers, and they didn't have dads around at all, or like very minuscule sort of relationships with their fathers. And even some of the men in my family were like had kids that they weren't involved with, you know what I mean? And that was strange to me. And so that was like me trying to understand why that is, and why that was almost sort of common, just like accepted, was the original sort of uh, thought process I was going through that led to me wanting to make this film.
So you interviewed a lot of people. You interviewed like academics, you interviewed regular
Mhm.
folk. So
Mhm.
as a result of all of those interviews and learning and doing the work, what did you learn yourself? What, if you could sum up your learning on the subject, what would it be?
That's hard. That's hard, Keisha, because I mean, all in all, I worked on this film for 7 years, 6, 7 years. I mean, it basically was the beginning of my adulthood, from I started when I was, I think, 23, and I finished it and it premiered and all that when I was, 30, right? Or about to be 30. So it was really like the entirety of my 20s. So it's hard to separate what I learned from this and what I learned from other things, but I learned a great deal. I think it's so hard to. I think that some of the most significant breakthroughs were about learning that African history and that African family structure, and seeing that, like, we came from strong family realities, and that slavery really did break that up. And I think the other thing I learned was just how critical public policy has been in the breakup, the disruption of the Black family, and the reinforcement of that separation and breakup. It undergirds everything, and so I think those are. If I had to sum it up, it would be those two things.
So I think it's hard for some people to imagine that systemic issues impact family. Like, I think people who are not marginalized would think, well, how is that so? What
Mm-hmm.
are some things specifically regarding Black fathers do you think that the dominant culture needs to unlearn?
In regards to policy, or just
Or Black
in
fatherhood, if you had to just think about some things that you learned about Black fatherhood, that you're like, you know what, I think the dominant culture gets this wrong.
yeah. Well, I'd say that I will say that there's been a lot more attention and improvement on the perception and the dialogue around Black fathers over the last 10 years. And not to credit my film with it, because it didn't, but like, there was, around the same time that my film came out, there was also just a lot more attention on the plight of Black males, and initiatives focused on improving Black male outcomes, and that sort of thing. But I think this. So here's the deal, right? Like, the data is accurate, and also not accurate at the same time.
Okay.
So the fact that, like, it is true that 68% or something to that effect now, I'm not sure the latest data, of Black children are born into single parent households. Um, but the truth behind that is, it doesn't look like it sounds, right? So yes, single parent households, but not really. Because this may be the person, the mother may be living with their parents, and there's a grandfather, there's other father figures around and involved. Also, the biological father, they may not be living together, but they do have a relationship. He is involved. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of gray area.
Yeah.
In terms of, as we know, like, there's a lot of gray area.
Right. The
So,
CDC actually published something in 2013 that said that Black fathers, while not always married to the mother of their children, are actually more involved than white
they,
and Latinx
they are.
um, dads. So I
They
think
are.
that's just like a myth. And where do you think like that? And I know you talk about, do you think that's a media portrayal thing? Where do you think society gets that notion?
I think. Um, I think it's a media portrayal. I think it's also a. Uh, there is some truth in it, right? There's a lot of people I know. There's a lot of famous people. There's, that grew up without fathers, right? And that's sort of been the narrative that is lifted up when it comes to, like, Black men overcoming things. They latch on to this narrative of, like, he came from nothing, and, like, or Black women, right? Like,
Yes.
born in a single parent household, like, didn't have poverty, and now he's a CEO, or now he's a famous rapper, right? I think it's been perpetuated in hip hop as well, because that's the narrative of a lot of famous hip hop artists too, and that's what they've talked about.
But that's also
But
the narrative of the Appalachians, of rural communities, and yet
yeah.
we don't talk about those as much
Hmm.
as we talk about. Like I was reading an article that said, like in the media, you will have that Black men would be less likely to be represented as dads and as loving dads within the
Oh
media.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
I thought, like, wow, if statistics say that men in general are not actively involved in their children, so why do we zone in on Black fathers if in
Hmm.
fact they are
Yeah.
active?
Well, I mean, they zone in on Black fathers in that way because it reinforces and contributes to like a racist idea, that people I are familiar with. And so it's easier for storytellers to frame stories around ideas that the mainstream population already has reference to
Mm-hmm.
versus inserting new narratives. You know what I mean? So when you insert the new narrative, it's hard for people to place like this character in this scenario, and that's one of the biggest problems with media, is that people are, especially like the big studios, they're afraid to insert new narratives that people don't know how to place. So they keep telling the same kind of stories with the same kind of characters. Um, so, so yeah, that's that. The other thing, just to finish answering your question, is that Black fathers are also like more progressive in terms of their roles than white households. So more likely to take on household chores,
Mm-hmm.
and child rearing responsibilities. Much more likely to be cooking the food, and just playing an all around, more supportive co-parenting, true co-parenting role than white families.
What in your film did you get a chance to explore the impact though when fathers are not present on the children?
Yeah. Um, I mean, the impact is I mean, the impact can't be understated. And I think we have to be careful when we talk about the data and on the impact of these things to not prescribe them to people and say this is what's going to happen to you,
Yes.
right? But just, I mean, in almost every aspect, children that grow up in single parent households are less likely to be successful, to have a healthy life, to have a happy life, to achieve their dreams, just on almost every aspect, right? Going into it, like they're more likely to have adverse childhood experiences. They're more likely to have social emotional distress and issues. They're more likely to grow up in poverty. They're more, less likely to go to college. So that's, I mean, it's correlated with the economic aspect of it as well. I mean, just one income in one household is not going to provide you with a lot of what kids need in today's society as a two-income household, and so a lot of it is intertwined with income, household income as well.
Absolutely. Look, let me ask you this: if the media is partially to blame, who else's responsibility is it to change this narrative and to celebrate Black fatherhood?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's everyone's responsibility. I think there's been a story that was going around maybe a few months ago about a brother up in Long Island that was organizing the Black fathers out there, and I think they did a dad's like march or walk to school thing or
Yeah,
something.
with the strollers,
Um,
I think it was.
yeah, the stroller thing. So I think that's cool. So I think in that story was covered. I think I saw it on like like Good Morning America or something. I mean, something big like that. So I think, the stuff like that is great, because I think it shifts the mindset of some people that just don't know no better. I mean, they're like, oh wow, look at this black father, like, you know what I mean? Like, for me, that's like, yeah, that's I mean, there's a lot of stuff like that. So it's not a like big news story to me, but for a lot of people it is. It's completely different than something that they've seen before, because they're not connected to black communities. So it
They think
addressed
our
that.
experiences are monolithic. They feel
Right.
like they've seen, if you've seen it once on television, you've seen all of black families, and that's just simply
Right.
not true.
Exactly. So I think that's a huge piece. I think it's important for Black storytellers to continue to, you know, get their work out there and to keep pushing. And it's a struggle, but right now we're in a moment where there's more opportunities being opening up for Black storytellers. So I'm excited about, all of what's happening in that realm, because there are really exciting new narratives being introduced about the Black family, and how it looks, and it can look in so many different ways. And so I think that's dope. And then I think we just have to continue to support, organizations that are working with Black families and community to help them navigate all the, intersecting systems of oppression that we're dealing with today, whether it be the school system, public welfare system, the criminal justice system, housing discrimination. I mean, all of it, right? Displacement, from our community. So
I
it's, I
appreciate
mean,
you naming all those systems. I appreciate you naming them, because sometimes we can say systems and people don't understand that all of those things work
yeah, yeah.
against.
Oh, they all work together, right? And folks are really dealing with it on, simultaneously on different levels in one household. You may be dealing with an eviction while also trying to get, a relative legal representation, while
Health
also,
services.
right, while also trying to find a job.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just it's all happening in households at the same time.
Jordan, thinking back to your documentary, was there a story from one of the dads that has stuck with you?
Oh, um, there's a lot, but I mean, I think the story of Ty Gray L, who's really, I think was the first father I interviewed, maybe. Um, his story was just really powerful. I mean, he's a storyteller himself, so he painted a really illustrative picture of his life. And he grew up in DC. He did not have his father around. He would became addicted to heroin at a very early age, like 12 years old. Struggled with that addiction for, I think 16, 18 years. Went to prison a few times. Did not have much involvement with his eldest daughter because he was in prison through much of her childhood. Um, but really found his way after I think his third stint in prison, and started to transform his life. Recovered from his addiction, and reunited with his daughter, and then started a new family with two more sons, and has just been very, very involved with the Black family and the Black community, and trying to advocate and uplift our folks, and just an incredible human being. So he's a poet. Ty Gray L. Look him up. He's well known for one of his poems, "Black Woman Smile," but he's dope.
I'm writing that down.
Yeah.
You captured me with the title of it. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
all right, Jordan, I just have some quick little lightning round questions as
Sure.
we end. What are you reading, and what do you suggest that we read?
Okay, so I'm reading a book called Compton Cowboys by Walter Thompson-Hernandez. Really dope book. Like filled with stories of these young men who grew up in Compton, and dealing with all the things that you would imagine they dealing with, black men growing up in Compton, but found refuge and healing at this ranch that is in Compton, where they like ride horses and are cowboys. Yeah, so it's powerful. It just came out like in April. I recommend it to everybody.
So
Compton
glad you
Cowboys.
recommended that. Now I'm going on
Yeah,
Amazon to get that.
yeah, definitely.
What's something that you yourself want to unlearn?
Patriarchy.
Mm,
Yeah, I'm working a lot on my own. Is notions and habits and thinking patterns related to women and gender roles, and trying to be more conscious and aware of my male privilege, and what I can do to create more opportunities for women of color, especially.
wow, I like that answer. What's your hope for the world?
My hope for the world, man, it's a big question.
Yes, it is.
You're asking it a tough time. I hope that we come out of this. I hope that we continue these really difficult conversations, that we're having as a nation and as a world, right? As we're trying to reconcile the atrocities, the genocides that have taken place, and the power that has been gained from that. And now, how do we hold people accountable? How do we hold systems accountable?
Mhm.
Um, and how do we build a more equitable, peaceful, loving, and liberatory society together? Um, that's my hope, is that we are on a pathway to that and can get through this on that path, and that these difficult conversations don't go away when Donald Trump goes away.
Amen. Where do we go from here in terms of Black fatherhood?
Where do we go from here? I mean, I think that there's been an improvement, if you will. I think that there's been a turning of the curve when it comes to the level and dedication and involvement of Black fathers in their children's lives, and the roles that those men play in their communities. So I think I think sort of my generation and our fathers being caught up in that crack epidemic was like really devastating.
Mhm.
And like, while criminal justice system continues to rage on, as does mass incarceration, I do see that that the men of my generation, my era, are trying to break that cycle. And so I think we just got to continue doing that and make sure that this next generation, these young people now, are not discouraged from creating families because of all of the despair that we see. There's a lot of people that have kind of given up, but I think we got to continue to be together and to make love and to make babies. You know what I mean? And to be there for our families. I just think that that's what it is.
Yeah, and I think this younger generation sometimes gets a bad rap. I think they do see hope. I think there's a power and electricity, and I think they are revolutionary. So I'm hopeful for them. Well, Jordan, thank you. How can people reach you if they want to get a hold of you? You have any social media handles that you want to share with us?
Uh,
If they want to
yeah, I
buy
mean,
the Black Fatherhood Project, they want
yeah. So blackfatherproject.com is where you can find a link to buy a copy of the film, or for your institution or nonprofit, or you can rent it on Vimeo for $5 for 48-hour time period. If you do want to get in touch with me, my Instagram is jordan.theory, and you can DM me there.
Okay. Thank you so much again for your time. I really appreciate it. I learned some stuff from you, and you just had some amazing responses, and you provide hope for us all.
Yeah, thank you very much, Keisha. I appreciate you doing some really powerful, important work, and I was excited to learn of your page. So thank you.
Thank you.